Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. Today's guest has views and strategies on real estate and wealth accumulation that will challenge what you know and how you think about debt and renting. He doesn't own the house he lives in. May have changed since writing the intro, but he still has a portfolio worth $25 million and a car collection of 15 cars that he's scaled back modestly down to 14. He specializes in building property portfolios for people earning high incomes, and if you haven't seen him on Sky News or any of the other media outlets, then maybe you've seen him in the same place I did over the summer. It was Bondi Beach in his convertible Porsche. Chris Gray, welcome to the Everything Property Podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Good to have you. Look, the reason I got you on, we're talking investment strategies in the Everything Property Podcast. So we're talking about how people can build a portfolio. I think where your strengths and your career is sort of tailored is building a portfolio on those people that have a high income, and you have a blue chip and a rent vesting strategy that we'll dive into. But before we sort of dive deep down into that, and people that don't know you and haven't done the research that I have, tell us a little bit about sort of Chris Gray coming up from moving over from overseas to Australia, property. How does that come into your life? When do you start investing, that sort of thing?
Sure. So despite my heavy Australian accent, I'm actually from the UK.
Yeah, couldn't have guessed.
In case you couldn't guess. So basically, son of a doctor, so came from a good family background, went to a regular school, but it was obviously a good school, but not private or anything. And my skill base was basically numbers. And long story short, we had inherited £10,000 to say $20,000. Wanted to move out of home because the whole rent money's dead money. Could only afford 3 times my income, so say £30,000, $60,000, and that will get you an absolute shithole, worst place in town, like a tiny studio, and you'd be fully mortgaged, and so you'd have no money for going out, which obviously wasn't going to work as a young 20-year-old. So I basically started looking at really expensive homes, and long story short, I worked out that a 3-bedroom house was cheaper than a 1-bedroom unit, because even though it was 7 or 10 times my income, I could rent 2 rooms out and live for free. And in those days, rents in the UK were 12%. It's all positive cash flow. I'd never heard of this negative gearing stuff in Australia.
Yeah.
And also the UK runs in chains. So I sell it to you, you sell it to someone else, and it goes round. Or you're buying my property, but you've got to sell yours to him, to him, to him.
Okay.
And so it could take a year. And so the guy that was living in the house I wanted, he wanted to move next door. He'd spent 10 years looking at it, and that's the house he wanted. And all the deals kept falling over. And I was a first home buyer, which meant I had no chain and the deal would be instantaneous. And so 100 grand place, and I bought it for 80,000.
Perfect.
And so what I learned from that is it's all about kind of connection to the deal, and it's not all about paying the highest price. Sometimes a quick settlement can be the way to go. And then I got friendly with the real estate agent. She was a cute female girl in the UK, similar kind of age. So we used to get drinking once a month. And then she told me about a block of units, like a block of 4, that the developer had underpriced, and she thought they were worth 100 grand, and he was selling them for 80. Said, "Do you want to go and buy one?" And so I ended up buying one of those, and I did a joint venture with my dad. But again, the learning from that is it's actually, even if you've got the ultimate knowledge, unless you've got the contacts with the agents and the relationship, she could have given that property to anyone because it was 20% off, effectively, like £20,000, $40,000 cheaper. And it was only because we were friends, I got the deal.
Okay.
And so then at 27, I moved to Australia and started doing it here. But rather than sell my properties, I used the equity to then buy in Coogee. Everyone said in 1999, you Poms have got no idea. You come over with your pounds, you think you know everything. Don't you realise?
They're stealing Coogee too.
Yeah, it's going to crash in after the Olympics. And I bought a 2-bedder for $360,000. That's obviously now $2 million or so. And so from there, I then used that equity to buy another one and kept repeating. And then I got into the rent vesting strategy as well. So it was really all self-taught. There was no books. There's no Robert Kiyosaki in those days, or at least I'd never heard of it.
Yep.
And so I learned from logical mathematics, not what my parents told me or what the banks or what society or what anyone else did. And I actually learned how to property invest after I retired at 31 from Deloitte's.
Yep.
And I started paying to do courses. And I thought, I knew what my mortgage was, but I didn't realise that was a percentage. Someone said, "What's your mortgage rate?" I said, "I don't know. It's like X $1,000 a month." I didn't realise this is a percentage.
Like an interest rate?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I just knew that there was an amount I had to pay.
Okay.
And like a rental yield. I didn't know what a rental yield was, but I knew I was maybe getting $500 a week in.
Yeah, you knew the numbers.
Yeah, I knew the numbers, but I didn't realise the science behind it. And then I learned that afterwards.
Okay, so you just touched on there. You're working for Deloitte. You left there when you were 31 years old.
Yeah.
What's your life position working for Deloitte in terms of property you're building up here? You know, how many properties do you have until you say, yeah, look, I think I don't need to work anymore. I'm going to pull the trigger. Was there a certain specific day or specific moment that sort of triggered that mindset just to go, look, for full-time job is good, but I don't need to?
So look, I was probably the most efficient person at Deloitte because I had a really cool boss, and I've moved from accounting into recruiting in those days. So I used to interview CFOs to put into our clients, and I got so efficient I could do my 40 hours a week in 20 hours because she would then let me go and property invest in my lunch times.
Yeah.
So I didn't gossip, I didn't hang around and stuff like that. I was super efficient because every hour I created was an hour for me to go off and property invest, and that's what made the real money. But the real catalyst was when I tried to salary sacrifice a 355 convertible Ferrari when I was at Deloitte's.
Yeah.
And I was earning 80,000, so not a lot of money, 60 after tax. And I said, how does this salary sacrifice work? Is it on the cost of the car or is it the retail price? And they said, I'll ring this partner. And so I rang him up, and he didn't know my name because I was so junior. And I said, does it work on the price you actually pay, as in second hand, or the retail price? And he said, oh, it's the retail price, and you pay FBT on it. And I said, oh, it's not going to work for me. And he said, why not? And I said, well, it's 250. And he said, 250 what? I said, $1,000. And I said, but the original price is $500,000.
Yeah.
And there was just silence, because how can junior staff members be affording 500 grand cars?
Literally on 80K.
And the tax, the FBT would have been like 250 grand or whatever.
Yeah.
And so rumours went round Deloitte's, and then I suddenly turned up in this Ferrari.
Wow.
And then the managing partner found me in a lift, and he didn't really know who I was. And he said, are you the guy that works for us that drives this Ferrari? And he said, I'm meeting clients on the golf course, and they're saying we're here junior staff are turning it up in convertible Ferraris. How much are you charging us?
Yeah, right.
And that's when we thought it's probably time for me to leave.
Okay, how many properties at that point do
So
you
I
remember?
had 6 properties. This was early 2000. They're growing about 100 grand a year, so it's like 20%. So for 2 years in a row, I was making 100 grand a year per property, so 600 grand. And that was in the good old days. I don't know if you're old enough for this. The good old low doc mortgage, ticker box for 80% and no explanation needed.
Okay, are they covering their costs though at that price point?
Like it was 20 years ago. It's hard to remember.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But in those days, it didn't matter. You tick a box. So if your portfolio goes up 600 grand, you could borrow 480 with no questions, no lying, no grey areas. Just tick a box.
Oh, must be
And
nice.
I was very happy in those days.
Yeah, let's bring it back. Okay, perfect. 31, you quit Deloitte in your Ferrari. What do you venture into? What do you venture into next, or how does the buyer's agency and the business come about?
Sure. So a mate of mine had given up work as well, and he used to do extras work, you know, on like TV and movies and stuff like that. And I had nothing to do during the day. And so I thought, I'll go and do that as well. Go and meet some superstars, see how they make movies. And I'm not an actor. I don't want to be in front of the camera, but I'll see how they go and do it. Anyway, we did like a Baz Luhrmann with Nicole Kidman, Chanel No. 5. I was a blurry photographer, but you get to hang out for 4 days. I think she got 10 million. I think I got $25 an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
But
sounds
it
right.
paid for the fuel in the Ferrari to get there.
Yeah.
And you spend all this time on set hanging out with people. So I used to help them about property stuff. And I helped this guy, and then he had a lead from his agency to say, Channel 9 are looking for a real estate expert, but they don't want someone affiliated with any brand like LJ Hooker or McGrath or whatever. And he put me forward, and I got the job. And it was a show called My Home.
Yep.
And it was to compete with, it was a Packer thing to compete with realestate.com and Domain.
Wow.
And so we did something like 37 shows, like flying around the country. We'd go to Queensland, chop a house in half and then put it on a truck.
Yeah.
We'd go and see a penthouse down in Melbourne. And so it's amazing fun, like a day a week, just travelling the country with journalists and stuff like that and doing the lifestyle show.
Perfect, paid gig.
So that got me onto TV. And then I hired a PR agent. Then I got onto Sky News. Then I started hosting Sky News. And all the time people were saying, how come you don't work? You live on the beach. I was living in Gordons Bay, Clovelly. Had the Ferrari, had a little boat. And I said, I told them what I'm telling you. I just told my story of how I bought property and how it made more money than working. And because I didn't sell anything, everyone believed what I said because I had no vested interest in taking them down a certain path.
Yeah.
And so I became the trusted person because I wasn't selling anything. So then I started coaching and mentoring. And then after a couple of years, people said, the wealthier ones said, look, I don't want to learn. I don't want to spend my Saturdays dealing with the agents. Can I pay you? Will you go and do it for me? And I tried to refer them to buyer's agents, and there was only about 10 in those days.
Yeah.
And they said, no, I want you to do it. And I suddenly learned you could charge someone, say, a couple of grand to teach them, but they'd rather pay you 10 or 20 to get the results.
Yep.
Like going to the gym.
It's nice and quick.
People would pay 10 times if they didn't have to go down to the gym, they could swallow that pill.
Fair enough.
And so that was early days of buyer's agency in kind of 2004, 2006 kind of thing.
Jeez, going back a bit.
And now every Tom, Dick and Harry's a buyer's agent.
Very true, very true. It's a lot more popular. But I see is one of the your property book that we have in front of us was it's got to go back to one of the first I think books I was gifted. So I was like it's full circle moment to finally have.
That was an original, wasn't it? 2008.
Yeah,
that's one of the proper ones.
It's seen better days. It's a bit weathered, but I mean,
at least it's been used.
It's been used. The prices need to be updated a little bit, but the interest rate that you used was 8 to 9%, as I said before. So we're almost back at that. We're almost back at that point.
And we've actually just reproduced it in I think 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Every word is still the same. The only thing that we've changed is those 500 grand examples. We've kept to $1 million.
Yep.
And then really that should be 1.5, 2 million now, but we've kept it at $1 million just because the mathematics is easier to work out per million.
Full circle.
But again, that shows the doubling of the property prices from 500 to $1 million to then pretty much 2 million.
So did the book come first, or you're mentoring? When did the book come?
So basically, when I finished mentoring, I thought, rather than, especially being on Sky, you get hundreds of people saying, oh, can I buy you coffee? Can I buy you lunch?
Yeah.
And I'm fat enough as it is. And I thought, no. And so I thought, put all the main content from the course into the book,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll give people the book. Most people won't read it, but it's good. Then they don't hassle me. A lot of people will read it and say, I don't want to pay Chris the money. I'll go off and do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. They don't take my time up. And then just the serious ones say, I see the value in paying 20 grand to maybe save 50 or 100 and get an expert to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so now my diary is pretty much free. Like most people are kind of work-life balance issues. I've got plenty of life. It's just I probably need to do a bit more work because I'm very good at delegating and outsourcing and then just dealing with the people that really want to know. And everyone else can have my material for free effectively.
Okay, it's a good way to just, as you said, clear out the calendar, read the book. Then, if you want to come talk after the book, then we can talk. One thing you say at the start of the book is like it's based around sort of high income earners and how to build a property portfolio. And that back in those days, and when you're on 80K, I'm sure if we go back 15 or 20 years, that's a decent salary, but. What would be your equivalent nowadays in terms of the work that you guys do in around buying blue chip properties, expensive in around capital cities? What would you say is now that sort of high income or that ideal income that if someone's listening, they can qualify themselves into that sort of category, and that this strategy that we're talking about would make sense?
Yeah, and look, the reason I decided to do or to work with high income earners was I saw around the property scene is there's a lot of people with no money, no deposits, no income or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And for those people, you've got to find them the money, then you've got to teach them how to do it.
Yep.
I'm lazy. I thought, why not teach the 5% that have already got the money, i.e.
Yep.
people at Deloitte or high income earners that I was surrounded with,
mm-hmm.
then all you've got to do is do it for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the lazy side of me. But look, typically now we buy properties, say in Sydney, say 1 to 2 mil.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Melbourne and Brisbane affiliates that have the same philosophy, but in their local areas that were obviously less than $1 million. But probably the cheapest we bought last year was 500 or 600.
Ooh.
And so that was, the start of last year, 2023, we bought a property, I think, in Hillsdale or kind of East Gardens area. It was a studio for 500 that rented at 600 a week.
Okay.
Now, look, we definitely couldn't buy 50 of those. Like, they just don't exist. So part of that was a once in a while. But we even still get first home buyers now that still try and get in. They still want to buy the blue chip versus buying a Southeast Queensland or buying somewhere regional. But look, I'd say generally most of the incomes could be 100 plus, but quite often there are a couple now.
Yep.
And so you're then talking maybe 200 to 400 grand income.
Okay, combined income for couples, or just over
as a rough idea. But again, you could get a first home buyer that's got that 5% deposit, but they've maybe got a parental guarantee or something that gets them in. So we're getting quite a lot of our clients now that are then buying for their kids. Because I've done this for 20 years, so some of my early clients have retired. They've gone up to Byron and
full circle,
and stuff like that.
Fine for the kids.
And then the young kids are coming through now.
Okay.
And obviously they want to teach the kids the value of money and say, look, can you help me? And look, I'm trying to teach my kids. My son in that book was, I think, literally 6 months old or something. I think there's a photo in the back.
Yeah.
And he's just had his 16th birthday yesterday.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the back page.
He's
got a little bit of hair there too.
He's as bald as me.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, look, the strategy and the investing strategy is different. There's people that advocate for like cash flow, regional, as you said, the Southeast Queensland, and that buy in around a few 100,000, 3, 4, 500,000. Your strategy is quite different. You guys look at for example, in Sydney, your eastern suburbs, your blue chip, as they call it. Do you want to unpack a little bit about the strategy and how that works in terms of why I would spend, if I'm coming to you, $1 or $2 million on that investment purchase first up, rather than spending, getting 3 properties worth 330 grand? Why would I go into that Bondi or that blue chip market? How does that work?
Sure. And so, look, the main thing is there's no one right strategy that suits everyone.
Yep. If
any advisor ever comes to you and says, you've got to do this, especially without asking many questions, I'll be running a mile because they're just trying to sell you stuff. So we turn clients down all the time. We say this isn't suited to everyone. And even first home buyers, normally I say you shouldn't use a buyer's agent because it will eat up all your deposit. So unless you can get the buyer's agent's fee, so on a credit card or from your parents, you're better off doing it yourself, even though you're not going to do it that well, because you could buy maybe a 500 by yourself, but if the buyer's agent takes half your fee, you can only afford a 250, and even a 250 well-bought property is going to take a long time to catch up to a 500.
Okay.
So it's definitely not for everyone. So again, the strategy is for high-income earners. So typically when you come towards the city, so we avoid the CBD, because there's no limit of supply. You keep getting these tall towers. Most Australians don't want to live in the CBD. So you're generally talking kind of 3 to 5, up to 10 or 15 Ks. So in Sydney, that would be kind of Eastern Beaches, Lower North Shore in the west, and obviously similar things in Melbourne and Brisbane as well. And what that really means is there's 3-story height limits. And so you can't physically build any more units. So even Bondi and, say, Manly has got some tall towers. That was in the good old days of the brown paper bags with the councils, probably in the 90s.
Yeah.
And unless you've got a very big truckload of cash, it's probably not going to work these days.
Yeah, it's hard these days.
And so if you can't, and this, a lot of this information comes from CoreLogic, RP Data, or Residex, as most people know. If you can't physically increase the amount of properties in an area, and you've still got lots of demand from young professionals and people with cash, price goes one way. So it's the typical schoolboy economics.
Limited supply, increasing demand.
It can only go one way. So probably in 10 years of doing 500 shows on Sky, the best bit of information I got was from John Edwards, who used to run Residex. So all he did was predict capital growth. And the common question is how can property prices around the world keep going up? Because wage inflation isn't keeping up with house price inflation. Part of the way they explain it is that our parents' generation or grandparents' generation, they had one income. They had a massive plot of land. They had double-digit interest rates. They had no government assistance. It was just buy one property, and there was no education. Now we've got 2 income earners per family. We've got single interest rates. We've got government grants for stamp duties and legals. We've got so much education. It's almost too much education now. And that will explain how most of the way the property prices will rise. But that only takes it up to a certain level. Whereas in these blue chip areas, we've got some clients, and this isn't a typical client, that would buy their daughters that are 18 and 19 $2.5 million properties for cash.
Must be nice.
So, yeah. I'm a bit too old for that.
I'll have words with mum and dad after this.
But the reason I'm saying that is they're not under stress for interest rates, employment, foreign exchange, government, any of that kind of stuff, because they bought cash for it. And say in the block I bought in Coogee that I mentioned in 1999, I think in 25 years, only 2, maybe 3 properties have sold, and we bought one of them for one of our clients. So if the property in this block of 9, only one comes up every 10 years, where's the supply?
Yep.
If you want to get into that block and there's limited blocks that are north-facing in Coogee with a view of the beach, you want that view.
You're paying a premium to get in.
You've got to pay whatever you've got to pay. And so in reality, in those suburbs, people pay what they're pre-approved to pay, not what the property's worth. So as buyers agents, we get independent valuations, and valuations, as you know, would be conservative because the bank doesn't want to lend $1 million on an 800 grand property. But people don't buy based on valuations. They don't do comparable sales. That if the bank lends them 1.2, they'll probably borrow 1.3.
Yeah.
They'll beg
call up mum and dad and get the deal done somehow.
And so that's the thing is, whereas if you go into an area that's maybe where there's a lot more supply and you can chop up a block and build multiple properties or townhouses or something like that, there's no limit of supply. And I would have thought most of the income earners in those areas are probably more likely blue chip, that are less likely to double their wages or to suddenly inherit millions of dollars, that they can take the price from 500 to $1 million to $2 million. And so in these blue chips, you don't have to be that clever. And that's the great thing. I don't have to be a genius. I don't have to study forever, because you ask CoreLogic and they talk in the papers about what's going on in the world, and you say, oh, what about Bondi or Manly or Coogee? Oh, no, don't worry about that. That's a different world. And so that's the thing. So John said is, we're not debating whether that's right for society and if it's right in our community in the future, but that's what's happening. So if you've got the cash to get in, and yes, it'll be negative geared and it might cost you 10, 20 or 30 grand per million to hold it, less tax. But if you've got the cash, would you rather pay 10, 20 or 30 grand to make, say, 50 or 100, or you pay 5 or 10 grand or make 5 or 10 grand, but you only make 25 or 50? So mathematically, if you've got the money, you go and do it. But obviously most people haven't got the money, so they haven't got a choice. Okay,
so touching on that, an interesting sort of analogy you use in the book is running your the property as sort of like a business, right? Is that the first couple of years you might see a loss, then you have rental growth and stuff like that. But I guess you covered it just thinking about it out loud. Is that like, what if let's go through like an example of a typical investment. If it's like a 2-bedder in Bondi, what you're paying, what it's costing to hold, and then what's like the growth that you're seeing in terms of an asset like that? Like what's
sure. So again, the book, which everyone can download for free, keeps it very, very simple. And now it's per million. So we'll talk in per million. So whether it's a 1 or 2 bed. So typically you're going to probably get 3.5% to 4% rent. If it's a cheaper
rental yield.
Yep.
Just clarify that for everyone watching.
So 35, 40 grand a year. If it was a 1-bedder, you may get 4.5. But let's call it, say, 40 grand for easy numbers. Then you'll pay an interest rate, maybe 6% at the moment?
Yep.
And let's say you borrowed that full $1 million because you use equity somewhere else. Now, in reality, you might have had to borrow $1.05 million to pay for the stamp duty and stuff. But just in rough numbers, $1 million at 6% is then 60 grand. So you've lost 20 grand.
Yep.
Then you're going to have about roughly between 0.75 and 1.25% for expenses. So land tax is roughly about 5 grand per million. So if you bought it for your own home, for instance, or you're under your land tax threshold, you wouldn't pay that. So maybe you pay 7.5 grand in expenses, so property management fees, all of that kind of jazz.
Yep.
So basically now you've lost 27.5 grand, which maybe at 37% tax, it's cost you 20 grand.
Okay, so just wind back a little bit. So I'm just trying to break it down. I know how it works, but 27.5 grand is your loss.
Yeah.
And then just sort of explain that through. So that's the loss that goes onto your taxable. How that works through sort of tax, and then how that sort of goes back down.
So let's say you earn 100 grand salary, and you'll be taxed whatever you're taxed on that. 30 grand or something like that.
30 grand, easy numbers.
Yep. Then at the end of the tax year, you say, right, okay, I've lost 27.5 grand. So you take that to your accountant or someone cheap like ITP if it's fairly straightforward and stuff.
Yep.
And the accountant will say, you've earned 100, but really you've only earned, 72.5 grand, because 100 less 27.5 is 72.
Yep.
But the government's taxed you on 100, so you can get tax back on that extra 30 that you've basically spent.
Perfect. And that's essentially negative gearing in a nutshell.
Yeah. That's in simple. But obviously, go and get some financial advice.
Yeah, of course. Not financial advice. It's
Yeah.
just general
Yeah.
conversation in nature.
And look, this is what I believe in, because a lot of the time you go and buy property through buyers agents or developers or mortgage brokers, they'll get it down. They'll have this big spreadsheet down to the dollars and cents to say this will cost you 49 cents a week or $49 or whatever. But suddenly interest rates rise 1% and it's cost you another 10 grand. So this is why I don't get into the detail. I think these big numbers, just like we're talking, because then you can say, if interest rates go to 7%, oh, that's another 10 grand. It's then cost me an extra 10 grand. So I try and get people on the big picture rather than in the detail, because again, most people don't understand it. It's all blurry, and they ended up buying a whole bunch of stuff that they don't really understand.
Okay, and then to see that example through 27 and a half, let's say it goes back after I claim a bit back in tax, 20 grand it's cost me to hold that property for the year.
Yeah.
You've then leveraged into $1 million property that all that has to grow is 2%, really.
Yeah. And so that's the break even that we talk in the bank. So how much does your property have to rise by for you to make that 20 grand? Well, at 10% it goes up by 100. At 1% it goes up by 10. So if it goes up by 2%, it's 20 grand. So the difference is, though, is you've got to find that 20 grand out of your wages to go and pay for it, but the property's gone up 20 grand. But that's a big picture. In reality, and I can't predict the future, but I'm assuming it's going up roughly at 7.5%. Or 5 to 10% over the long term. So say if it's 7.5%, it's gone up 75 grand. So my bet is, when I buy that property, am I prepared to put in my pocket for 20 grand a year, so roughly 1.5 grand a month, but ideally over the long term, and it might not happen this year or next year, but over the long term, I expect it to go up 75 grand a year, or in 10 years' time, I expect that million to be worth 2. And if it's cost me 20 grand a year, plus a bit of interest, it's cost me 200 grand, but I've made $1 million. To me, that's a pretty good bet. And so it's almost like forced savings in a way. Is I'm prepared to sacrifice because I know long term. And if I've got the extra money in my wages, I'll go and blow it. We all know it. We'll go on holiday. We'll get a better
buy a car or 14, you know.
14 cars or something.
Hate when that happens.
And so this is why when most people buy their own homes, it's great because it's forced savings. It's the first bill you'll pay because you don't want the roof over your head disappearing. So I'm very much a fan of forced savings, but obviously within limits.
Okay, and even I think you're pretty conservative with 7.5%, especially in those blue chip areas. What I want to know, though, and I think where the statistics show is that a lot of people are getting, a lot of Australians in terms of investment properties they own. So if I'm on a really good salary, 150 grand or something like that, and I buy one of these properties and it's out of pocket 10 or 20 grand a year, it's then going to make the next purchase really difficult. So is there a way around that? What's the best way to grow a portfolio if they're negatively geared each year?
Yep. So then the concentration is rather than spending all your time researching properties, doing that, all of that can be delegated now, whereas it could before. You need to be better at work. You need to go for your bonuses. You might need a second, third, fourth job. So for me, from 22 to 31, I worked my backside off, and I did whatever it takes to then make sure I can get those mortgages. And that was the really kind of strong point for building that portfolio when I was young, when I was single, before I was married and kids, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's then ideally having a partner who's got a similar kind of thought process as you that wants to do it at the same time.
Mindset,
Then maybe approaching parents to say, can I use your equity? I don't want a handout, but can I get a guarantee? It's whatever it takes, obviously legally. And there's so many creative ways there. There's so many investors that have gone and done stuff. I was talking to one of my clients today about raising money now, not using serviceability, is like going to, say if you have parents or even friends with money in the bank on term deposit, you might get 4 or 5%. You're a developer trying to get mezzanine money, they'll pay high net worth 10 or 15%.
Correct.
If you then said to a parent, you're getting 5% in the bank, how about I give you 6 or 7% compounded, so that means I don't have to pay you every single month because you're not using the cash anyway, and I'll give you a percentage of the property value, or I'll give you that when I sell the property, or when I can refinance you out. And I've done deals with strangers in the UK, and this is in my 20s, and I worked out how I could double his income double his capital growth. I do all of the work, and I only profit when he's been paid first. And it's actually super simple.
Wow.
But there's just, if there's a will, there's a way, you can go and do it.
You can find it.
And so even now, so I've got $10 or $14 million worth of debt. I went, and everyone said there's no way you can get money out of the bank, and everyone's whinged for 5 or 10 years you can't get cash out from the banks. That's a big thing. I went to the bank. I've said I've got a debt-free property worth $1.5 million. I want to borrow $1 million. I'm going to buy a whole bunch of vintage cars, which normally you can't even get normal car finance on because they're so old.
Yeah, right.
And they said, is that an investment? I said, no, they'll probably depreciate. And they still lent me $1 million with no financials because I had the right asset in the right place. And my exit plan, it was only a 3-year loan. I said, worst case, I'll sell the house.
Okay. And they lend that to you?
And they lent it to me. Yeah. And this is through a regular mortgage broker. This isn't telling any lies. This is telling the complete truth. I said, I'm buying vintage car. And as I bought them, I showed them the receipts and showed them what I've paid.
So the bank's okay with that?
Again, maybe it's the right person. Maybe it's the right mortgage broker. Maybe it's having the right story.
Yep.
And so this is the difference. So in the early days when I started, everything was about property investing. As in, what do you do, where do you buy it, how do you buy it, how do you rent it, how do you get like when I bought an investment at 24, so in, probably 94, no English banks did investment mortgages. I had to go to Bank National de Paris to go and get a mortgage. No one had heard of investments back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Whereas these days, every Tom, Dick and Harry has. Whereas now, 95% of investing is getting money from the banks. And that's
it's a finance game, yeah.
So it's your mortgage broker's got to be your best mate, and you might need 5 of your best mates as mortgage brokers. Accountants, all this. So I go to my broker and I don't say, can I borrow money? How do I borrow money? And I don't go to my accountant and say, reduce my tax, I don't want to pay the government. I go and say to my accountant, the mortgage broker says I need to earn this amount of money. That's what I need to show in my tax return.
Yep.
And so and again, this isn't about doing anything dodgy, but there's a big difference between putting an invoice or an expense through on the 30th of June or on the 1st of July because it goes into one tax year or another tax year.
Sure.
So it's just massaging the account. And if anything, you're doing the tax man a favour because you're trying to bring income forward to show yourself more profitable than on average.
Yep.
Or looking at 2 financial years and trying to build up 1 year as financials to say to clients, I'll give you a 10% discount if you put it in on the 30th of June. There's nothing wrong with that. That's commerce. And you build up your income in that year, who cares?
Yeah, it's being strategic.
Yeah, because, and again, you're not trying to tell the bank a different story. There's nothing wrong with doing that the next 24th of June. So they can say, oh, you've moved 10 grand of income into this year. Yeah, but I can do the same thing next year. And the banks just want to tick the box. If you need to show that on the form, then that's what I've shown on the form, and I've got the income, or I've got the accounting records to back it up.
Yeah, it's interesting because I always hear a lot of people complain and don't want to pay tax. And obviously, if you're like anyone, Kerry Packer, I think, said it was that, like, try your best to alleviate it. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't want to pay any tax, earn $18,200 a week, you got to.
Yeah.
It's better to show that, like. In terms of, it's funny with cashies and people that work in trades and stuff that get the cashies and stuff, that might be good for short term and to spend that on like dinner and whatever you want. But if you're showing that on your tax return, you're earning more money, you're increasing your serviceability, and you'll be able to buy more and more and more, and it works out better that way.
Yeah. Because I just think every property I buy ideally makes me 50 to 100 grand per million over the long term. And so even if I've got to pay an extra couple of $100 grand in tax, who cares? Because if that asset doubles from $1 million to $2 million, the tax is insignificant.
Yep.
And the tax man's a clever man. Even if you're in cash these days, they've got so many ways of catching you, of following you to bars or restaurants or whatever else, and saying, well, what are you doing? So, I mean, I used to use, or I still use, they've now moved out, like Deloitte Private. People would say, why do you need a multinational accounting firm to do, like, you're pretty basic, Chris, you're not that wealthy and you're not that complicated. But these guys work with the billionaires. They understand how, and the billionaires pay the accounting fees to understand how things work and trust and whatever else. And then little old me comes along and I pay a slightly less fee than the billionaires because I'm not getting them to reinvent the wheel and at a lower scale. But why wouldn't you pay the best brains to go off and find deals? It's like if a buyer's agent, one of the guys we have, Kel, he's worked in the East for 20 years. If he's buying hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of properties over his career and has a 20-year relationship or 30-year relationship, how can you come off the street and compete with that? When he does a deal at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, when you're tucked up in bed and he's maybe at the pub with them or exchanging a contract or something, you can't compete. And so you either pay the fees to get that experience or get that contact. I did it with a car. I was buying my wife an Audi RS4 wagon.
Yep.
And used a buyer's agent, and he said, you go and find a car, I'll then go and buy it, and I'll go and buy it trade, and you pay me 20% of what I save you.
Perfect.
Why wouldn't you use it? Because he's done hundreds over the years.
Oh, car buyer's agent.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, how does that work? But
yeah, he charges, and they do handbags, they do watches, anything you want to buy.
wait, so run me through how the car buyer's agent works, just
most
for when I
people-
buy my 14. Yeah.
So I never found one that could buy the weird ones that I buy now. But when I was buying a regular car, if someone's been in the trade and they've been in the car business for 30 years, they're going to know all the tricks of the trade. They're going to know what sells for what price. I'm going to walk in off the street. They're going to see me coming, increase the prices.
Yeah.
But even not, you ring around. You get the best price you can, 100 grand, say.
Yep.
He then gets you exactly the same car, but maybe even younger with better extras and the rest of it, and you get it for, say, 90. He saved you 10 grand, you pay him 20%, 2 grand. But even if you paid him 5 grand or even 10, at least you know then you haven't got ripped off with a lemon, and that you've got a guy that really knows what he's doing to say, oh, no, I wouldn't buy that model, I'll buy the model before because that model had lots of problems or whatever.
Yeah, okay. So leveraging off the network and the people in around your team.
So part of it's the strategy and the information, whether it's property or cars, and then part of it is the relationships and the bulk buying power to then get better deals.
Tell me just quickly while we're on cars, I know you live in the East and there is a scarcity of land and garage spaces. So where are you keeping 14 cars?
Yep.
You just got one car stuck at a tower somewhere, or?
Well, when some of them are fire engines, stretch limousines, they don't fit into garages either.
The worst place to have a big car too.
Yeah, but I can get my tank.
Yeah.
And yes, I have got a tank.
Yeah,
with
we'll
a
post
machine
it up.
gun.
I'll post up a photo of it. Yeah.
So it's, I think, a 1954 Ferret Daimler. Technically, it's an armoured car. It's not a tank.
Yeah,
but it's got a
okay.
machine gun and it's bulletproof. So the other one, so I live in Darling Point, which is nicknamed Dying Point because everyone's so old they go out in a coffin. And so in the building we rent in for about 1% yield, then most people have been there for 30 or 40 years. I get tipped off when someone's so old that they can't drive anymore, and then I go and rent the garages.
How much the garage rent?
So garage is about 100, 120 a week. So about $5,000 a year per car. And so I think around there. So I've got 4 in my building, 1 opposite, and then 2 within probably 500 metres. And then a client of mine lives on acreage in kind of up St Ives Way. And I said, is there any chance I can leave a fire engine at yours? And he said, I've got a 2-year-old grandson. He loves fire engines. He gets a free fire engine. I get free parking.
Yeah, okay. It's who you know.
It's all about working to find mutual convenient things.
Working to find mutual convenient things. I like that. Tell me, you just dropped a little bomb that it was in my intro as well, but you don't own the house that you live in.
Yeah.
Do you have any aspirations of ever owning a PPR?
I don't think we ever will.
Really?
So the last one I lived in, I think, was maybe when I was 29. So I'm 52 now, so almost half my life ago.
Wow.
And so the thing was, so I was living in Tamarama in those days, which is obviously kind of a nice suburb. And we then saw this really nice place in Gordons Bay, which is Clovelly, between kind of Coogee and Bondi. And it's like a townhouse right on the water. And this was back in kind of 2000s. Is worth about $1.5 million, and the rent was $620 a week. Now I could find a flatmate that would only pay $250, so this was roughly what the rent was in those days. So I agreed that if I got the bigger room, I'd pay $370 because I wanted to live in a nicer house, and he was paying $250. But you're paying $620 for a $1.5 million property, which is about a 2% yield.
Yeah.
And so this is where I learnt it. And then a few years later, a mate of mine came from the UK. He had sold his business, and he wanted to rent a penthouse. So I rented him one in Macquarie Street. It's about $10 million. but it only rented for maybe three and a half grand a week, which was a lot of money like 25 years ago.
Yeah, and today.
And I'm saying, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you spend 10 million on this when you can go and rent it for 300 or 400 or three or 4 grand or something? And then bring it forward. He then had a penthouse in Sydney that was about 20 million. And he said he could only get about 8 grand a week, which was 400 grand a year, which is a lot of money. But I think the land tax was 100 grand. The cleaning bills was 100. So he only got a 200 grand return on a $20 million property, which is peanuts.
Wow. One thing,
And shall I tell you what?
Yeah.
So very, very quick to what. So you go and buy a 2-bedroom Bondi, middle of summer, for $1.5 million or so, rents for, say, $1 grand or so. How many people are queuing up to rent it?
heaps
Yeah. So what happens to the price?
goes up.
And they've even brought in laws now to stop Dutch auctions, but the price still goes up.
Yeah.
You got a $5 or $10 million home, not in Bondi, but in, say, an older area like a Vaucluse or a Bellevue Hill or something like that. How many people can afford the rent on that?
Not a lot.
So what happens to the price?
Stagnates, goes
Goes down.
They pick whatever,
And even the few people that can afford it, do they want to rent?
No.
No, because poor people rent. That's the stigma in Australia, isn't it? Poor people rent. So what happens to the price? Goes down even further. So it goes from 4 to 3 to 2, quite often down to 1% yield.
Wow.
Most of these people are that wealthy that they've paid off their homes. And so that 1% basically covers land tax and a bit of repairs and maintenance, and they're happy. And they don't want to sell it because it's maybe been in the family for generations or something, especially like a Vaucluse or something. And so it gets kept, and you get to be the benefactor.
Okay. What about, so you said that you're renting now at Darling Point. What if, I don't know if you know your landlord or not, but a lot of the argument that people have around buying a PPR is security, that like you don't know that your landlord might not put up rent or want to kick you out.
Yeah.
You've got 4 car spaces in the building. What do you say, or what's your sort of strategy or thoughts around that?
Sure. So when I first got married, so I've been renting for over 20 years, and I'm married with kids, and obviously I used to be little kids, now one's just turned 16. So we started to move all the time, like every year. And my wife was a property investor, so she got it, but she was still getting a bit pissed off of having to move.
Yep.
So I said, rather than us dread having to move for a whole year and be negative, why not let's assume we're going to move? And so if we can stay, it's a bonus. But every time we move, we're going to move to a better suburb, to a better property. And so it's a positive feeling, like holidays. Do you want to go to the same joint every time, or do you want to say, where should we go this year?
Yeah.
It's positive.
Mindset shift.
Then when it comes to moving, it's because we had such a great relationship with the removal company, because we use them every year, we then said, kitchen to kitchen, bathroom to bathroom, lounge to lounge. They knew all our gear because they've moved it every year. And so we give them the keys on the way to the airport. We'd then come back. The removalists have moved it. They've unpacked it. The cleaners then come in. She's put stuff in the kitchen. She's made the beds, put the teddies in there for the kids and all that kind of stuff. And look, in my mind, it's 90% done.
Yep.
I don't normally invite my wife on these podcasts because she'll probably say, look, it's 40% done. But you get the idea is you can get rid of most of the pain with money. And if we're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars by renting rather than buying, if a removalist costs 3 or 4 grand and a cleaner costs $500, maybe you move for 3, 4, 5 grand, peanuts.
Over there.
And all the pain has disappeared. And she used to get her parents coming around to help. And I'm saying, don't get them around to help, because then I've got to help. And then it's painful. So let's have no help. Let's get someone else to do it. And then suddenly there's no stress.
You trust a removalist with all your stuff?
I've got nothing valuable. That's part of it. And if you've got a professional moving you, how well am I going to pack something that never packs anything? Look at these fingernails and how soft my hands are.
Wow, he moisturizes.
But again, how am I going to do it compared to a professional wrapping a TV that he's done 100 TVs?
Interesting. One thing I want to ask as well, based off that, is I said it before, and I say when I talk to people, is that like I feel like almost in all circumstances, not in everyone, but a lot of the time, it's the male part of the relationship that pulls towards these strategies, these ideas, and it's almost as if the female looks to the PPR and the security and the safety and growing the family. So, with your partnership with your wife at the moment, when did you know, or how long did it take to sort of be aligned on this is the goal, this is the dream, this is what we're doing? Because I feel like early on, if if that's a rift and you're like, no, rent investing, this is it, and they want the house, then...
Sure. And look, first of all, take a step back. I understand that is generally the thought process.
Yeah.
However, I know a lot of females that not necessarily wear the trousers, but they're the financial ones, and they say, my husband's holding me back. I want to go harder. So it is, I wouldn't say it's equal, but there's definitely a lot of females that are very gung-ho, very driven. And I'm in a lot of business and entrepreneur groups, which it may be the demographic that I'm around, but a lot of them are saying the husband's holding me back rather than, so it's definitely changing. But look, with mine, so my wife already had 2 properties when we got married, and I had, I think, 5 or 6 by then or something like that. Her father was a business, he ran a multinational, so she was very much had a background around business and money and finances and networking and sales and marketing and stuff like that. So she was quite an astute person. And look, we are in a way more of a traditional family that I'll deal with the money side of things. I'm obviously being an accountant, I've taken the numbers to a different limit. And look, she knows what I do, but probably not 100%. And she wouldn't be able to sleep necessarily if she knew everything. Like, she knows everything, and she's got access to all my accounts and all the rest of it.
Yeah, good catch.
But I do push the limits beyond most people. So our debate at home is our kids saying at school, what do your parents do? Mummy works for a living, Daddy eats pizza, drinks beer, and watches TV. And she was saying, maybe you need a job, Chris, to show our kids the value of money and the rest of it. And I'm saying, well, rather than me have a job for 60 hours a week for the next 20 years, maybe I can get them to read my books and teach them rather than me have to get a job to prove it. And so I've actually got my son now. He's reading a book a month for payment to show there's a different way, because, sure, I only work a few hours a day and I've had a reasonably cool life for 20 years, but I carried the stress of over $10 million worth of debt, which most people can't even sleep with $5 million worth of debt. And so I'd rather have that on my shoulders 24/7 than do a 40 or 60 hour a week job. And so, sure, it's stressful. I don't have to take it to that limit, but I have. And again, buying a couple of $1 million worth of cars just as interest rates go up 4% wasn't the best idea in the world. But at the same time, I'm very much a believer in live for today and make the most of it. Because if I die tomorrow, I'll be a very happy man saying, well, I've had all these life experiences that most people would never have, and my insurance payout will cover my family and look after everything. So, again, going back to the thing is having a partner that trusts you to do a certain level. And even though I do take things to extremes, I am still very conservative. So like in my books, I still work on 7, 8, and 9% interest. I hire the best accountants I can in the country to go through things. My insurance is over $10 million. I pay about $100,000 in insurance premiums a year just for my health. And people say, why would you pay $100,000? It's ridiculous. But I say my portfolio, say it grows at, say, 5 or 10% a year. It goes up, say, 1.5 to 2.5 million a year. If the insurance comes out of that equity, whether I earn 1.4 or I earn 2.4, does it make a difference? No. So why wouldn't you pay that $100,000 of insurance premiums to know that no matter what happens in your life, you're going to be okay? Yeah. But most people don't think that way.
No, it is. It's really interesting to get into your mind and your mindset, because I think there's a lot of things that we've been taught and that people live by, but are you really questioning just how to think about things and how to approach things? And it might be your accounting background, but it's very like numerical, numbers based, and like just logical.
And my wife hates it, and look, all my friends take the piss all the time because she doesn't even bother asking for the reason now, because she knows I've got some way of justifying. Whether she believes it or not is a different thing. Yeah. But I can justify anything. Yeah. Like one of the hardest ones was when I went to buy this tank, which I saw on
need it. Trust me.
Facebook marketing. I saw this.
Facebook marketing.
Yeah. And I then researched it because they said it's street legal. You can drive it like a regular car. And so I started doing some research. And I saw this video with Jay Leno, you know, the car guy in the US. And he was driving it. He's got exactly the same car as me, or the same tank. Yeah. And he said the hardest thing about owning this car is trying to explain to your wife why you need one.
How'd you sell it? How'd you get across the line?
Well, I think I bought it first and then asked for forgiveness afterwards. But it's like, well, when am I ever going to get a chance to drive this again?
What was the cost of it, by the way? Just
$60,000,
$60,000,
which is peanuts.
What's the
in
top
the grand
speed?
scheme of things? 90 in reverse. It's got the same 5 gears for forward or reverse, because the whole idea is a scout car, so it's looking for where the shit's going on in a war, and it was used in the Australian War.
Yep.
I'm not sure which war it was, but yeah, apparently it was a war. And shit hits the fan, you can chuck it in reverse and do 90 in reverse to get out of there.
Good
and so when you're at Woolies in Double Bay, shopping, and say there's COVID and there's toilet roll wars, I should be all right as long as I can get back to the tank.
Yeah, I mean, if the bank doesn't lend you any more money, you can just run that through the front door.
And so I thought it was a drive-through.
Perfect. They're making a new a drive-through in
again,
Rose Bay.
Even though obviously there's things going on in the world these days, and having something like that isn't potentially ideal, the amount of smiles. So I took our valuer out. He begged me to take him out yesterday, and so he put it all over social media and stuff.
Yep.
The amount of smiles from young and old people, it's amazing, the pleasure. And over Christmas we had Christmas hats on it and tinsel and stuff like that. It just brings so much fun in people's life. And I understand people don't like it, and I understand some people it might bring back memory.
Yep.
But the pleasure it gives a lot of people is just absolutely amazing.
Same with the fire truck.
All of those things, like kids' parties, I lend it out for free.
Yeah.
And people, I say, you just got to pick it up. I don't want to go to a 2-year-old party, but for a case of beers, you can borrow my fire engine, take it to your party.
Yeah.
And the kids love it. It's amazing fun.
Look, Chris, I really appreciate the chat, and I think it's really, for anyone listening or watching, it's a interesting conversation about mindset. I have 2 final questions to rattle off, but your thoughts on structuring these in ownership. Are these in personal names? Are you a trust guy? What's your logic and what's your thoughts around that?
Sure. So originally I bought them in my own names because no one had even heard of trust in those days. I'm that old.
Yep.
Now a bunch of them. So I have a portfolio for my UK family and Australian family, and they're 2 different structures for that.
Yep.
It's an accountant and a lawyer's question, really. Most of the reasons for a structure is obviously asset protection and flexibility to move profits and losses between husband and wife and kids and stuff. Now we're getting more and more hearing from certain mortgage brokers saying, if you've got it structured under a different trust and maybe a different trust per property, there's maybe rules around serviceability and declarations that you can get more.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that was the case, and there's obviously a cost of setting up more trusts and administrating them, but if that meant that you could borrow more money, that's, to me, in my mind, a very good reason for doing it, because it's not looking at the cost, it's looking at your net profit that you make after the expenses. So if you can buy an extra property and it makes you an extra 100 grand, you pay 10 grand of expenses, who cares?
Yeah, because if you can keep going, right?
Yeah. But again, is the land tax. So 2 of my properties I've got in the eastern suburbs I don't pay land tax on, and so that saves maybe 10 or 15 grand because then you're under the land tax threshold. So that's one reason to have maybe 1 or 2 in your own name.
Okay, perfect. And then interest only versus principal and interest. I know how you work it in the book, but I'd just like to hear your thoughts. And for those people listening around investment properties, interest only, principal and interest, what are your thoughts?
Yep. So the idea is to go interest only because your repayments are lower. And so I think in the book examples back in the day, then a 500 grand principal and interest mortgage was the same repayment as a 600 grand interest only. 600 doubles to 1.2, whereas 500 doubles to $1 million, and you wouldn't have paid off 200 grand's worth of repayments in that same time. So that's the main reason around it. Now I'm forced on some of my loans to go P&I because now after the Royal Banking Commission, after 5 years, quite often it reverts. And no matter what I say about, but I'll do a declaration to say I'm going to sell my property after X amount of years. They want to prove that you've got the affordability to then pay the loan off over 25 years. So, look, it's one of those things, which is even more reason is when you're young and you've got the income, that's the time to borrow heavily within reason to get as much properties as you can. So by the time you're forced to go interest only because maybe you haven't got a job or you can't service, then it doesn't matter. So I think I'm paying back now maybe 100, 150 of principal repayments. But look, it's not the end of the world. In worst case, I'll then pull out a debt-free property and refinance it and buy some more cars later on. So if there's a will, there's a way.
Jesus. Okay.
If you want me to come around and have dinner with your wife or your partner or anything and explain something, there's a high cost, but it's
we have to get a tank out. Chris parked up on the footpath, so we've got to finish up in case he gets a fine. But he parked the tank up on the footpath. get to this podcast. But look, Chris, I appreciate you coming on. I've learned a lot, and I know that anyone listening to this will. And it's a really good insight to unpack the mind of someone that has the runs on the board, and that isn't. I don't think aligned with the stereotypic and normal way of thinking. You've definitely got have had and experienced the incredible life doing things really differently. And I think it's good for me and for this podcast is to not try to sell anyone on any particular way to do it, is to present all the cards and all the ways to do it, all the strategies, and for people out there listening to be able to make their mind up on what suits them and their circumstances best. So I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks for joining us on the Everything Property podcast.
Yeah, no, look, it's good. And my motivation is basically me building my own life.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are building businesses out there, and that's one thing for people to be aware of, that they're selling you something that's good for your business, whereas I'm really just telling my story of it's worked for me.
Yep.
Take whatever bits work for you and then mix and match whatever you want to do. So, but the main thing is to do something. Do something,
Best
and
way
at
to
least
do
you've got a good chance of something good happening to you.
Perfect. Take action. Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you so much.